everyone, I'm Molly, the Islands Education Manager with the Trustees. Every week I'm going to be sharing with you a short lesson that you can do at home. So this week we are going to be studying marine invertebrates. For this lesson there's just a few materials that you'll want to have on hand. And of course if you don't have these things, it's not a big deal. You can still follow along and learn with me. So you'll want at least one piece of plain white computer paper, a pencil, either some crayons or colored pencils or markers. If you have 8 different colors, that would be great, but just a few colors is also fine. And then finally, a pair of scissors. The pair I have here is quite big, so hopefully you have some scissors that are more kid size or kid friendly. And definitely if you're younger, have a parent help with the cutting that you'll be doing for this activity. So you'll see up on your screen now that I've put an outline of the puzzle that we'll be putting together later in this lesson. What you can do now is pause this video, and with the help of your parents, or if you're able to on your own, you can trace these shapes, cut them out, and color them in. So this week we are going to be studying marine invertebrates, and in particular oysters. So for this short lesson you'll actually see an oyster being dissected, and we're going to really dive in and learn all about oysters. But to start with, I'm going to go through marine invertebrates. So what are marine invertebrates? It might be a term that you've heard before, but let's break it down a little bit together. So the first word, marine. This is something ocean or sea based. And then invertebrates. You may have heard of a vertebrae. All humans have a vertebrae or a backbone. So marine invertebrates are animals or organisms that are lacking that backbone. There are tons and tons of marine invertebrates throughout the ocean, but today I'm just going to focus on 4 different types. So the 4 different marine invertebrates that we're going to study right now are all within the same phylum, mollusks. It's going to be really interesting to take a closer look at them because even though they're all related within the same phylum, they have pretty obvious differences as well. So let's take a closer look. As we look at these specimens, I recommend you take out your pencil and a piece of paper, and you can, as we go through each one, you can write down any similarities or differences that you see, and you could also draw them as well. That's a great tool to do. So the first one here, you may have seen this before as you're walking along the beach or if you've gone out to collect them to eat, but this is a scallop. So a scallop is again within the phylum mollusk, but then is the scientific classification it's in the class bivalve. Bivalve is an important word that we're going to be looking at later in the lesson as well, but bivalve means 2-shelled. So it's an organism or an animal that has 2 shells. So a scallop, when it's living, its 2 shells will look like this, and it will be connected, and the scallop will be able to open and close to filter water and to move along the seafloor. So that's the scallop. It might be good to take note of on your sheet the texture of the scallop, how it feels. It has these little ridges here. But remember, it does have 2 shells. So it's our bivalve scallop. Next, we have a clam. This is a hard-shelled clam. Think about it compared to the scallop. It also has 2 shells. Has a hinge point right here, and it's able to open and close as well. There's our clam. Next, we have the oyster. This oyster, or oysters, are also bivalves. Just like that clam and the scallop has a hinge point, and it's able to open and close to filter water. So there's the oyster. So these 3 organisms are all called bivalves. Then, finally, we have this. So this guy definitely looks different than what we just looked at together. And this is not a bivalve, right? Because it only has one shell. There's no other piece of it. This is called a gastropod, and that's its class, gastropod. This gastropod is called a whelk, and specifically, it's a channeled whelk. So it has this channel here that you could almost run a marble down, and that's a good way to remember it. So this is the channeled whelk, and you can make note of that on your sheet as well. So this channeled whelk is within that same phylum. These are all mollusks. So they're all related and they're all marine invertebrates, but they do all have their special differences as well. Okay, so now we're going to get to the fun part. We are going to be dissecting an oyster. So we'll be able to see a live oyster. We're going to shuck it and open it up and really take a look at its internal anatomy and its different organs in there. So if we zoom in here, hopefully at this point for the lesson, you have your different puzzle pieces that you've been able to color and cut out. So the different puzzle pieces are different parts of the oyster. And as I'm going to dissect the oyster, and you'll be following along, you can try to match the puzzle pieces with the different parts of the oyster. And once we're done dissecting, we'll come back together and work on the puzzle as a group. Okay, so here we are with the oyster that's open, it's already shucked. And as you can see, there are two shells here. This part that has the inner anatomy that we're going to dive into in a minute of the oyster, and then this side of the oyster, the top shell that came off like this. So to start with, on our list of what we're trying to identify are the valves. So valve also means shell. So we have one valve here and another valve here. That's why oysters are called bivalves. So two-shelled organism. Next we have the mantle. The mantle is the thin layer of tissue that lines the inner part of the shell. So that's this area here and also this tissue here. So I'll move it a little bit and you can actually see that oyster is contracting a little bit on the edge, just a bit as I touch it. So that is the mantle. Next, we're going to look for the gills. The gills are present on the left side of the oyster, underneath the mantle. So what I'll do is lift up the mantle here really gently so we can try to get a look at the gills. And let's see how many gills we can count in the oyster. So there's one right here that I'm slowly lifting up. It's a little bit attached there. 1, 2, let's see, and I see a third here, and then the 4th. So 4 gills, one on the bottom there, here, and at the top. So that's there underneath the mantle, and these gills, just like in a fish, are used for breathing. So I'll bring that mantle back over on top of the gills. Next, we want to look for the adductor muscle. So the adductor muscle is a pretty impressive muscle of the oyster. It's right here. And it's fairly hard, and you can see on this valve or shell of the oyster, that's a part of that adductor muscle. Can you guess what the purpose of the adductor muscle is? If you think it's used to keep these two shells together, then you are correct. The oyster uses that muscle to open and close slightly so it can filter water, and that muscle keeps these two shells together. It's a very strong part of the oyster. Next, we'll look for the heart of the oyster. So the heart is right below the adductor muscle, and it's within this cavity down in here. So I'll try to poke down a little bit further to see if we can get a better view, because it's going to be within the cavity down in there. And I might have to poke it open a little bit. But that is the heart right down in there. So next we'll look for the stomach of the oyster. So the stomach is right here. And as I'll open this up a little bit, and you can see there's some dark material in there. So that's the algae and organic matter that the oyster is feeding on and filtering. So the oysters are known as filter feeders. So they're always filtering water, and oysters can even filter up to 50 gallons of water every day. It's pretty impressive what every oyster can do. So there's the stomach right there. On the left side of the oyster, near the stomach, are the palps. So the palps, we can think of it as the oyster's mouth. Looks sort of similar to the gills that we saw up in the upper section of the oyster up here. But the palps are down below, closer to the stomach here. And if I take my tweezers right in here, I'm pretty much sticking my tweezers into the mouth of the oyster. And that's called the palps. So the palps there are pretty much the gateway to the stomach of the oyster. And then on the other side, finally, we'll look for the rectum. The rectum of the oyster should be a thin, creamy colored tube. We'll see if we can get a look at it. If it's below or more on this side here. Sometimes you have to dig around a little bit because this one is not as obvious. But the rectum should be right this area here. So what I'll do is I kind of can put my tweezers there along it. So you can see this is the line from that stomach. And this is where the oyster then would expel or get rid of any water and dispose of anything that it's filtering, again, through that mouth and then out the rectum down there. Okay, so at this point we've dissected the oyster. It's pretty cool, right? And now we're going to put together our puzzle. So the first piece of the puzzle is this, the shell or the valve. So you can see I've written number 1, the valve. So this is the outer, or the shell of that oyster. The next piece of the puzzle is the mantle. So this is going to go right on top of the valve, because if you remember from the dissection, that's that soft tissue that's on the bottom of the shell. Then we have the gills. So see, as I'm doing this, if you can put your puzzle together too. If we remember, the gills are on the left side of the oyster. Then finally, next, the adductor muscle. Do you remember what the adductor muscle is used for? If you said it's for opening and closing the oyster shell, then you are correct. Next, we have the heart. So try to find this piece of your puzzle, and that goes right below the adductor muscle. And then below that is the stomach. So find your shape like this. and that will go right in here. I might have to overlap a little bit sometimes, depending on how you cut them out. Next, the palps. So remember, this was like the mouth of the oyster. I'll tuck it under the gills a little bit. Right down in there. See our oyster starting to come together. And then finally, the rectum. And if we recall, that's coming out of the stomach there. So I can tuck it right under. It's purple. I've colored my stomach purple, but yours might be a different color. And finally, we have our complete oyster. So hopefully your puzzle looks something like that, but you can have fun putting that together and showing your family members. And we'd love to see it. If you take a photo of your completed puzzle, you can post it in a comment on this video on our Facebook page or Instagram or on YouTube as well. So thank you so much for joining me for this lesson on marine invertebrates and in particular oysters. I hope that you were able to learn a lot and also have some fun as well. So next week I'll be focusing in on shorebirds, and we're going to be studying shorebirds' beaks and the shape of their beaks and what they're able to eat based on that shape. So it should be a lot of fun, and again, we should be able to learn a lot. I look forward to seeing you then.